Hi, everybody. It says that I'm live, so I trust that you can see me. I've noted in the past that there can be a delay of a minute or two in the chat, but I see you. So you are here, which means that I am here. Hello. My name is Thorn Mooney. Some of you might know me. I've been on the internet for a really long time. I started on YouTube in about 2011, and I'm basically on all platforms except for Facebook, which I'll talk about later. I began publishing with Llewellyn in 2018. My first book was called Traditional Wicca, which was about initiatory Wicca. And my most recent title, which I'm really excited about, is called The Witch's Path: Advancing Your Craft at Every Level. It's a guide about taking your next steps, about those walls that we all run into, kind of regardless of what tradition of witchcraft we practice. So whether you're a beginner struggling with overwhelm, or if you are a coven leader or a community leader who's dealing with burnout, or maybe you're kind of an advanced witch who's read a lot of books and just is wondering what comes next, that's what the witch's path is for. So check that out. I'll talk more about myself later, but let's get into it. We don't have a whole lot of time. So here's what I want to do. Actually, I'm going to ask you to do something for me really quick. You may or may not have a notebook in front of you. If you don't, that's okay. You're welcome to just take a note on your phone, or if you want to just contemplate this for yourself, I'm going to give you about a minute. And what I want you to think about, and I'm going to ask for your thoughts here in the chat as you have them. I want to know, what is the best thing about the internet? And what is the worst thing about the internet? So take a minute to think about it. You can jot it down. You could share it in the chat. What's the best thing about the internet? And what's the worst thing? Take a minute. I will wait as I adjust here. Hi, Bailey. Hi, Kathleen. Yeah, so Finster says that a ton of information. It's both the best and the worst. Yeah, maybe you guys are going to have answers that are actually the same for both the best thing and the worst. Catherine says the best thing is, oh, Catherine's answer is going away. Connecting with others all over the world. The worst thing, connecting with people all over the world. All right. Yeah, Kathy also says, like Finster, the availability of information. Bailey says the broad range of information available. I'm seeing lots of things about connection, getting to meet people all over the world, lots of things about access, what we can look up, having access to all kinds of information. The death of nuance as the worst thing. Yes. I think Heidi would agree with that statement too. Heidi says misunderstanding and a rush to judgment. Yeah. Okay, so now that we've got some ideas there, here's what I want you to think about next. What is it that you actually want out of the internet? We have some ideas about the good stuff and we have some ideas about the bad stuff. Now I want to know, what do you want? Why are you even here? Like generally on the internet. What do you want out of it? Annette says truth. Audrey says information. Jonathan says connection and knowledge. Emily also says information. Allison says to make friends. Yeah, lots of you are saying things about community. Melissa, I want you to right now. Lots of really good things. Yeah. Entertainment, education, connection, information. Lots of really great answers. So one of the things that I talk about in The Witch's Path at length about magic broadly, whether you're a witch, you're some kind of ceremonial practitioner, really whatever your background is, your outcome is dependent on the goals that you set for yourselves. Like that probably isn't a foreign concept to you. If you are trying to accomplish something, you need to first have an idea of how you're going to measure success. And one of the things that I think maybe we don't talk about enough, not broadly, because we know that there's lots of great things about the internet and lots of bad things about the internet, but we don't always think very specifically about ourselves and what we're looking for. And what we're looking for individually is going to impact our experience. So I'm gonna, what I'd like to end with when we finish this workshop, I'd like you to have some ideas about how you can shift your own experience with the internet, maybe how you're relating to it. And then I'd also like you to leave with some ideas for how to improve your online experience, whatever goal it is that you have for yourself. So the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of the internet as a place. I think if you, so I'm an elder millennial, which means that I got the internet when I was at the tail end of middle school and into high school was when we got computers, we got on the internet. So I didn't grow up with it. One of the cornerstones of like the millennial experience is the analog childhood and then the digital adulthood. So for me, it was a shift. If you are younger than me, that it's possible you've always had the internet if you're Gen Z or younger. Um, and it's I remember being young and people would talk about the internet when it first came out as this very suspicious sort of place. There was this idea of like anybody who you might talk to is some sort of predator or you have to be really careful. The internet was kind of this like, people didn't think it was real. One of the things that was very controversial was whether or not you could actually be friends with anybody online. So when things like online dating became a thing, there was a lot of derision around stuff like that. This idea that, well, only like pathetic people who don't have real lives make internet connections. Yeah, like, and now I hope that that sounds ridiculous to us. Back in 1999, I think it sounded more reasonable because the internet just still was so new to everybody. But now, I mean, I met my husband on Tinder, everybody. Okay. Like some of the best friends that I've met on Instagram and YouTube. And I bet a lot of you have very similar stories. I remember communities that I was involved in on LiveJournal back in the early 2000s, and I'm still in touch with some of those people. Some of them I've met IRL in real life, others I never have, but those relationships continue to be some of the most important that I have. So, one of the big shifts that we've had is the internet is a place, right? The phrase in real life is kind of misleading. And when we think about the internet as a place and we shift very consciously into thinking of it that way, our relationship changes in really substantial ways. And just like places out in the world, there are different spaces online for some things versus others. For example, you wouldn't go to a mall, a bank, right? A bakery or like a child care center all for the same reason, would you? Like you'd go to different places and expect different things. The internet works that way too. So if you're going to go to Facebook versus Instagram versus the Google web browser versus whatever, you're going to find different things. Yeah, April, they called us Zennials. That was the generation around like 1980, 1984, where it was like, are we Gen X? Like, definitely not, but sort of. Yeah, so there's some overlap there. But when we think of the internet as a place, the rules change. And just like when you are going to the bank versus picking your kids up at school, you can set boundaries for when you participate in one space versus the other in the same way that you might set a schedule. So lots of the things that you all have described as the bad things on the internet are the result of how we interact with people in place. If we're all on Facebook, if we're all on TikTok, if we're all here on Crowdcast and we aren't in agreement about why we are there, we're going to run into conflict. And some of the times when we experience dissatisfaction in one place, it's because we're there for the wrong reason. So in order to deal with that, I advise looking at where you hang out on the internet and thinking about it in the same way that you would think about like going to a grocery store or going to the swimming pool or whatever other like physical places you have in your life. What do you want? How long are you going to be there? um, what people are going to be there with you. Um, Lots of folks kind of talked about how relationships can be really sticky. So I think about it this way. If I'm going to one place versus another, I don't necessarily want to invite my great Aunt Tilly. I don't necessarily want to take children with me. I don't necessarily want to let my boss know I'm going, right? So we have boundaries that we put into place in our physical spaces, and those same boundaries need to exist online. And that's where I think a lot of us get into trouble. So, for example, I'll tell you a quick story. I mentioned at the beginning, I'm basically everywhere except for Facebook. One of the reasons why I'm not on Facebook is because I found it really difficult to establish those boundaries. And it's precisely because eventually there came to be this expectation that everybody was on Facebook. When Facebook first became a thing, you had to have a .edu email address. It was designed for university students. And when it became open to everybody, it really shifted, so that suddenly it wasn't even just that anybody can join, it was just that everybody almost had to join. People were doing business online. Groups were advertising for events exclusively on Facebook. So you always had the opportunity of running into your great aunt Tilly, right? Basically. And there wasn't a way for me to separate that. And that was very important for me because aside from being a witch and aside from eventually becoming an author, I was also a school teacher. I was teaching in an elementary school. I was doing counseling not counseling, that's the wrong word, tutoring for things like the SAT, reading and writing, that sort of thing. So I was working with children. Eventually, I was working at a high school. I had all of these professional obligations. And at the same time, like all of you also have family obligations. And it's kind of like just because I tell my mother something or my husband something doesn't mean that I want my great Aunt Tilly to know. Okay. My great Aunt Tilly is not a real person, by the way. Aunt Tilly is my placeholder for when I need to talk about the family I would like to exclude from things. Um, that not having boundaries in place is what gets us in trouble. So I figured out really quickly that I didn't need to be on Facebook and my life didn't fall apart, you know? Um, in the same way that you don't have to go to every single place IRL, you don't have to be on every single place on the internet. And not all places are for all people. I have found at different points in my life, I've really enjoyed some platforms versus others. I really enjoyed Instagram for a long while. Now I'm not so sure. There's been a shift towards marketing and sales, and I'm really not a salesperson. I don't have any products to pitch. Well, I guess I have a book, but Llewellyn does a lot of that for me. I don't sell online. Um, so not all places are for all people. And I think that sometimes there's a hesitancy to share and to be in spaces and to be open because we're in the wrong spaces. So that's worth asking yourself. If you really find that you're not enjoying a platform, it might just be kind of at the very beginning. I asked you to think about your goals. It's not meeting your goals. It's not giving you what you need, and maybe the place isn't for you for one reason or another. Something to think about. The second thing I want to throw out, kind of in that category, just like thinking about places, is consider separating your accounts online. Many of you probably already do this, where you might have kind of your regular, like mundane life account. Maybe this is the one where you interact with your own version of Great Aunt Tilly, and then you have your magical account. You keep them very separate. That's something that I started doing when I started writing, mostly because I didn't want my 17-year-old students to be able to Google me. It's just a question of privacy. It's not that I was worried about getting in trouble at work as a witch. It's that it's my own personal boundary. I want control over how many people know that I'm a practitioner, and I didn't want my students to know. just because it wasn't any of their business. So I have separate accounts. That's something to think about. Some people think that that's disingenuous, but I feel like it's a question of where your boundaries are. If you're confident having those things merged and you can navigate those spaces, that's great. But there's nothing wrong with being anonymous on the internet. That's kind of one of the beautiful things about the internet. So take advantage of that and explore it if it's something that appeals to you. The second thing that I wanted to talk about, which is something that you all really focused on, was networking, building community, and also learning. So I want to talk about strategies for networking in particular, because I feel like on the one hand, everybody's online. So this is kind of an exciting opportunity. There's potentially so much space there to build relationships, build groups, build communities. But on the other hand, because everybody is there, it's like you're still wading through so much. And now we have to worry about things like bots and spam accounts, people who aren't even people, it turns out at the end. So, how do you navigate all of that? I want to talk about hashtags for a second because I don't feel like a lot of us use them as efficiently as we could when we're searching for connections on social media. Something that's very important that I think a lot of people aren't aware of is that individual platforms have unique hashtags. So, for example, as a witch, I use a completely different set of hashtags to search for people on Instagram versus what I do on Twitter or TikTok. Completely different hashtags. You'd think you might just use hashtag witchcraft or hashtag witch, but if you do those, what you'll find is you actually have like millions and millions of posts to wade through. Hashtags can actually be a lot more specific. So, for example, if you're searching for members who practice a particular type of tradition, maybe you're interested in a very specific kind of witchcraft, see if that tradition has its own hashtags. For example, Wiccans often will use like I've used hashtag Gardnerian Wicca or hashtag traditional Wicca, hashtag initiatory Wicca. Be specific. If there's a tradition that you're interested in that has a name, search for that explicitly. See if it has hashtags. On Instagram, we use hashtag witches of Instagram. On TikTok, it's hashtag witch talk. So be sensitive to that. If you're finding that you can't find what you're looking for, see if you aren't being specific enough in your search terms. It's kind of like with Google. If you're searching for a group in your area, you don't want to just type traditional witchcraft into a search engine. You'll come up with 8 million things. Instead, if you're looking for something very specific, I'm looking for Blue Star Wicca, or I'm looking for whatever your thing is. Be as specific as possible. And that's the way to do it with your hashtags as well. So something to think about. As far as navigating the sea of information and vetting things, the rules that you use for deciding what books you're going to read or what movies you're going to watch, all of those rules really still apply. So if you can search up additional information, maybe about the person or the website, are there reviews? If you are looking at, let's say, maybe a popular Instagrammer or maybe a popular YouTube, ask yourself, who are they citing? What are they reading? What credentials do they have? What credentials maybe should they have? And evaluate them the same way that you would a book. Most of you will have learned some techniques for evaluating written work at some point. All of those things still apply on the internet too. So sometimes on the internet it can be kind of tricky. We see accounts that have like millions of followers or hundreds of thousands of followers, or they're very popular, and it's easy to kind of fall into this trap to think that they're authoritative. But in reality, that's often not the case. Sometimes it is, but it's something to be cautious of. Terry notes that the internet is a tool. You have to be careful how you use it, and don't let it use you. Yeah, I think that's really true, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with keeping our boundaries. So something that I want to do right now, kind of thinking about that with vetting and your follower list, I'm going to ask you to do another exercise, and I'm going to give you another minute or so, which is going to give me a chance to catch up on your lovely comments. What I'd like you to do, if you have your phone on you, maybe you're using it for Crowdcast. If that's the case, maybe don't do this. But if you're at your computer and you've got your phone handy, I'd like you to actually open up your feed on whatever your platform of choice is. If you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram or TikTok, like whatever the thing is, open up your feed. And I want you to look at the first thing that pops up. And what I want you to think about is, does that thing serve you? How does it make you feel? Is it teaching you something or is it keeping you informed? What job is that thing doing that's at the top of your feed? You don't need to scroll. I just want you to look at the top thing that comes up. How does it make you feel? Whatever post is at the top. Will says, I have a dumb phone. It just makes phone calls. My dad is in that same boat, Will. I'd kind of like to be in that boat sometimes too. Crystal says, the first thing I see makes me happy. My friend posted an adorable cat pic. Nicely done, Crystal. I have a lot of cat things that I follow as well. Arwen says, one of my friends posting. I appreciate it. Meredith has a community Facebook group that comes up, which makes them feel informed. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, for Leah, it's a post about pride. The content and burlesque. That's amazing. Yeah, stuff that makes you feel good. Yeah. Cats. Lots of you see cats. Great. So that's really important. What comes up? How does it make you feel? Because you have full control over your feed. That's something that I think a lot of us relinquish when we get online, and we've been online for a long time. This is something I found myself doing during the pandemic, like when it first started. Did you all do this? They call it doom scrolling now, where you get online and it's just like nightmare story after nightmare story, terrible statistic, something terrible happened somewhere, and it's just that, right? And then after like days and months and then like literal years of that, it's like, wow, why do I feel depressed all the time? Why do I feel just totally bummed out? I bet some of you have those kinds of experiences. Every time you're opening up your online feed, whether it's a social media platform, if you've got like a blog roll you follow, whatever it is, ask yourself, how does this make me feel, first of all? And what job is it doing? Because you don't always have to feel good. I don't always feel good when I open up the Washington Post, right? I get Washington Post emails. And a lot of the times there's nasty stuff in the news, but I still want to know about it, even if it makes me feel bad. It still has a job. So I'm not asking you to just like bright side yourself and only follow the cats, even though I'd sort of like to do that sometimes. Um, but if it's making you feel a certain kind of way that isn't super positive, is it at least doing a job that's valuable? Is it informing you? Is it making you safer with a piece of knowledge? Good. It looks like most of you are in pretty good shape, but this is something to really keep in mind. Your feed is totally within your power. So something that I talk about in the Witch's Path and something that I'm going to ask you to do in the coming days is to really evaluate who you're following, what sources you're following, what are you consuming. Earlier, I asked you to think about boundaries, right? Blocking off time, thinking about what spaces you want to be in versus what spaces you don't want to be in. Now, this is me asking you to think about who's occupying those spaces with you and how you're going to decorate those spaces for yourself. Keep those things that serve you, that have useful jobs, and that make you feel the way that you want to feel. I think that sometimes we have a lot of guilt about, um, you feel obligated to follow a friend because they followed you, or you feel obligated to like, well, I know my mother uses Facebook, so I'm on Facebook for my mother, right? Like, ask yourself, are you doing something because you're obligated to do it, even if it makes you feel bad? And is there an alternative? So something that I did, um, I don't follow a lot of my fellow author friends here at Llewellyn and at Wiser, right? Like I've got a lot of witch friends who are also doing work as authors. And one of the reasons I don't follow them isn't because I don't support them and I don't love them. Because guess what? You don't have to follow somebody to still share their posts. The reason I don't follow them is because I have a really short attention span and I'm also prone to depression. I've dealt with clinical depression my whole life, and I have a tendency towards comparison, and I have a tendency towards distraction. So I just straight up told a lot of my author friends, I love you, but I can't hear about how many words you've written in your new book every day. I can't. Not because I'm not celebrating you, but because it distracts me from what I'm writing. And sometimes it makes me feel bad about myself. And that's a me problem, not a them problem. Okay. But that's okay to do. One of my best friends told me that she was like, I hope you don't mind, but I'm not going to follow you on Instagram like for a while because I know you're doing a lot of book stuff, but like I really don't like having a lot of witchcraft on my feed. Right. She enjoys the cat videos. And even though I know that she loves me, I knew that it wasn't personal. You have control over your feed. It's okay to mute people and it's okay to block people. I know a lot of us have had toxic experiences online, but honestly, like one of the best ways to avoid that is to be really liberal with your block button. And remember that it's not necessarily a judgment about somebody else's character. It's about controlling what's on your feed, which you have a right to do. And if we all sort of agree with each other that preserving our feeds is about preserving our sanity and our well-being online, then I think we can all get along maybe a lot better. Um, the last thing I want to talk about before we run out of time is how there's kind of a spectrum between like the fear of missing out and not being included and then oversharing. And I just want to affirm that as a practitioner, especially as a magical practitioner, you don't actually have to share anything about yourself and your personal practice to get a lot out of the internet. I often tell people in the Discord server that I operate, lurkers are welcome. Like, I am not entitled to anything about your practice just because I post about mine on the internet. And that's true for all of you. You can share as much or as little. Sharing more does not make you more authentic or more knowledgeable as a practitioner. And sharing less doesn't mean that you aren't still part of a community. So, something to think about. We've got just like 2 minutes left if I've got my timer here. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take any questions that you all have. You all have been so active. I'm so excited. And I noticed that a lot of you are sharing your online handles. Please do that with this. Opportunities like this are a great way to make friends. And you'll be surprised what kind of friends that you will make just by speaking to each other. Awesome. I love this from Leah. Distraction and comparison is the thief of joy, and we don't owe anyone an explanation for self preservation and joy. Exactly. Yeah, Banshee says, I use mute a lot. I very rarely block. That's true for me too, Banshee. I hardly have anybody blocked. I think I have like the NFL blocked on Twitter just because I was getting so many advertisements, but mostly I mute people. I mute people I love. And it's just because of me, right? Like I have to control my own feelings. April says, I've been told I need to post more social media for business purposes. You're making it sound less scary. I'm glad. Terry asks, do you think witchcraft should be for sale? That's really interesting. And that's got a lot of layover with the internet as a marketplace. I think that's a really complicated question. And that's something that I've thought about on my YouTube channel, actually. I'll pull up a couple of videos, Terry. I don't know if you've checked that out, but that's something that I think about a whole lot because I'm right there in the middle of being an author with a book to sell, but also a practitioner who thinks that what I do is sacred and shouldn't be tainted by capitalism insofar as that's ever possible. All right. Leah asks, as a scholar and author, where do you predict the media landscape going in relation to micro communities like Patreon and Discord? So Thank you also for the segue, Leah, because I would have forgotten to talk about my own platform. So I use Patreon, and I know that lots of other folks use Discord. I use Discord as well. People are getting to like subscription platforms instead. Honestly, I see those things getting bigger. I see us shifting away from like the Facebooks and the Instagrams and going to these somewhat smaller platforms. And I anticipate more subscription-based platforms. And the reason I think that they're so appealing and why they've worked so well for me is because they eliminate trolling. If there is even a dollar paywall, which is what I use on my Patreon, I understand that kind of like what Terry brought up, there's this weird place where witchcraft and the marketplace intersect. Um, so I want things to be accessible, but I also have to pay my bills, right? So it's a mess. So I made Patreon $1. And the main reason I did that was because I instantly stopped getting hate comments. I instantly stopped getting trolls because that dollar barrier presents that. Terry, enjoy strawberry picking. All right. All right. Well, I think we are just about at the end. So if you missed the beginning, hello. This is The Witch's Path. It's about taking next steps as a witch when you feel stuck. You can find me. This has been a really great discussion, and I'd really like to keep talking about it. You can find me at YouTube by searching Thorn Mooney and as Thorn the Witch on most other platforms. I'm on TikTok and Instagram as Thorn the Witch. I do some silly stuff, but most of it is me like kind of pontificating about stuff like the marketplace and media studies. I'm actually a PhD student in a religion and culture program, so I have a lot of words. Anyway, come find me. I am on Patreon at Thorn the Witch, and I will see you all really soon. I hope that you have enjoyed LlewellynCon so far, and there are some really wonderful speakers who I know are coming up next.